here. So I've got my wee mascot as well. So hi guys, welcome to the first panel on Sunday Sunday afternoon, sorry. So this is the hashtag Edinburgh, and I'm Lynsey, and I'm chairing the event, and I've been organising the Reading Between the Lines online crime book festival, and I've got my wee mascot all the way from Edinburgh, which is our panel today. He's got his wee Edinburgh jumper on, his hat and breeks. So let's say hello to Teddy. So we have got Val Penny, Lesley Kelly, Ed James, and Peter Ritchie. So we'll start with Peter Ritchie. He started his working life at 15 as a deep sea fisherman, and he eventually joined the police service, moving through the ranks of CID, Murder Squad, Regional Crime Squad in Scotland, and then he went on to manage the Organised Crime Unit in the National Criminal Intelligence in London. And he's travelled to many parts of the world in his role. He was appointed as the UK liaison officer in Europol in The Hague, where he spent 5 years. So he then returned to Lothian and Borders, heading the major crime team, before taking on an advisory role for a project in Croatia. And following his retirement, he's worked on a number of private investigations, and before spending the next few years as part of the public inquiry team, looking into the murder of Billy Wright in the Maze prison, the LF leader. So he currently writes the Detective Grace McCallan, if I'm saying this right, and there's 5 books in the series. Then we've got Lesley Kelly. Lesley has worked in the public sector for the past 20 years. She dabbles in poetry and stand-up comedy. She's won a number of writing competitions. Her first novel, A Fine House in Trinity, was longlisted for the McIlvanney Prize, and her second novel, The Health of Strangers, was published in 2017 by Stone Press. So after that, there was the next one was the Songs by Dead Girls. Then there was The Death at the Plague Museum. Then there was the Murder at the Music Factory, which is the latest one. And there's also currently still a free ebook in the Health of Strangers trilogy thrillers. Then we've got Val. Val is an American author living in southwest Scotland. She has 2 adult daughters and 2 cats. She has a law degree from Edinburgh University, and she has an MSc from Napier University. She's had many jobs, including hairdresser, waitress, lawyer, banker, a farmer, and a lecturer. It's saying that she hasn't achieved either of her childhood dreams of becoming a ballerina or owning a candy store. That one I like. Until these dreams come true, she has turned her hand to writing poetry, short stories, and novels. So her crime series is the Hunter series, and it's got Hunter's Chase, Hunter's Revenge, Hunter's Force, and Hunter's Blood. And obviously they are set in Edinburgh, and they're published by Crooked Cat Books. And the fifth series in the novel, Hunter's Secret, is actually published by Darkstone. So you've moved.
Yeah, it's an imprint of Crooked Cat.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And that was out. Was at least it was launched
this month. This month, yes. Yeah, just last week.
And you've also got you've got a non-fiction book called Let's Get Published as well, which is really interesting for anybody that's up and coming, or wants to know how to go about getting their books published. And then we have got Ed James, who is the best-selling author of the D.I. Simon Fenchurch series, set in the gritty streets of East London, where there's 6 books in that series. He's also obviously got the Scott Cullen series of Scottish police procedures, featuring a young Edinburgh. It says here detective constable, but he's not. He's an inspector now, isn't he?
That's a spoiler for anyone who hasn't read it. Yeah, he started out as a DC.
Yeah, so he's actually, well, obviously, when you first meet him in Ghost in the Machine, he is the detective constable, and he is, from the very first book, he's determined to move himself up, from the very first page.
Yeah.
And actually, Ghost in the Machine has been downloaded over 400,000 times, and it hit both the Amazon UK and US top 5.
Yeah.
And then spinning off from the Cullen books, there was Craig Hunter books, He's an ex-squaddie who suffers from PTSD, and he now works as a cop investigating sexual abuse cases. And there's 3 books in that series, am I right? And obviously he lives in the Scottish borders. He writes full time, but used to work in IT and project management. And he used to literally write on planes, trains, and automobiles. The ultimate way of writing, I think. What else are you going to do? And obviously, I forgot, he's also got, now he's got the DS Vicky Dodds, who is set in Dundee. And he's got the Bain and Cullen series of short novels, which are absolutely really good as well. So I'm going to start with the question of, and I'm just going to go like, so Val, Lesley, Peter and Ned, I'm just going to first of all ask you, how did you all get started writing? Val?
Well, I started writing my first novel when I was recovering from cancer. And I had no energy to do the things that I normally would have done, like travel and baking and swimming and walking. I just had no energy. And I don't know about any of you, but daytime television gets pretty old pretty fast. So on that basis, I did the only thing that I had the energy to do, and that was read. And then I started writing reviews of the books that I read. And then I think out of desperation, my husband said to me one day, well, look, if you're feeling a little better and you know so much about what makes a good book, why don't you just write one? And that was it. That's how Hunter's Chase was born.
Very interesting, Val. So, Lesley, how did you get started?
I started writing relatively late in life. I was well into my 30s before I actually started writing. I did a PhD, and when that got to an end, it was kind of a bit of a loose end, didn't really know what to do next. So I started writing short stories and had a couple of successes with those, and then thought I'll write something a bit longer. So I wrote a novel, and then like everybody does when they get to the end of their first novel, didn't really know what to do with it. But there was a competition called the Caledonian Novel Prize, and entered it into that, and it got longlisted. Didn't get any further with it. But one of the great things about the competition was that you got a bit of feedback from an agent. So the feedback from the agent was, with my original book, I had written it in Scots. And she said, like the story, but, writing in Scots, there's just a fairly limited market for it. And for that reason, I wouldn't be interested. So I thought, okay, I could stay true to the principle of writing in Scots, or do I care that much? And I thought, well, no, actually, I don't. So then I had to go through 80,000 words of Scots English and turn it into English, which was fine. Most of it could be done on a spell checker, find and replace, wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't. It was no that got me, because sometimes no means no, sometimes no means not. So I had 80,000 worth of nots and no's to go through. But it was worth it, because at the end of that, one of my colleagues had been published by Sandstone Press, and she said, send it off to them, see what they think. They'll give you some feedback at least. And I was really lucky. That was the first publisher I sent it to, and I got picked up there. Which was really, really good, but I wouldn't really recommend getting picked up quite so quickly, because I wasn't really ready for it. When I got published, I didn't even have like a Facebook account, which seems so strange now. I have so much social media. So there was a bit of a steep learning curve between finding out I was getting published and the book actually coming out, but still really, really grateful for such an easy ride.
That's really interesting. Peter, how did you get started writing?
Well, I didn't write till, when you say you started quite late at 30, that certainly wouldn't apply to me. I was much later. I always wanted to try and write a story. But as you can imagine, the kind of job I did, it was all-consuming, if you like. And I think, looking back, actually, that's a good thing. I think trying to write a book when I was in the job probably wouldn't have worked. I think you need the benefit of a bit of hindsight, a bit of space to do it. But I'd always written poetry, short stories, that kind of thing when I was in the job. And then just after I worked in Northern Ireland, I thought, right, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to die of old age. So the time in Ireland actually had quite a profound effect on me. And that's why I decided to invent this character who starts off in Belfast during the Troubles and moves on from there. I only intended ever writing one book, and but I loved it, you know, from the word go. It was just a great experience, and it was really down to friends. You know, self-published, and it was really friends that encouraged me to have another go, write the second one. And then I decided to write the Grace McCallan trilogy. And then after the trilogy was finished, friends encouraged me to write the fourth part of a trilogy. So, and so it went from there. So I've loved it. And I suppose the thing for me was that, you know, the crime field, if you like, is packed with so much talent. So the only thing I could try and do was to you know, do as an authentic story, or as authentic as possible within 300 or 400 pages. So that's what I tried to do. You know, I tried to make the books the way I saw the job, you know, and how the emotional side of the job, and to make it as real as possible, because as I say, there's so much talent out there. You've got to try and bring something slightly different. So that's what I try and do. And the pandemic for me has meant that I've written another Grace McCallan book. So I've done it in record time this time. So yeah, that's how I arrived after a career in the police. That's why I'm here today.
Very interesting. And Ed, how did you get started writing?
So I started writing because before writing, I was trying to become a musician, and came reasonably close to it with a couple of bands, and then the eventual sort of this horrible weekend where I got an email from a sort of label that were interested in signing us, saying nah, and then on the way into work the next day, on a Monday morning, I had a bike accident and snapped the ligaments in my foot. So I was in a bad place, and I just had it with music. So I started writing about someone who was in a band, and like, you know, all the stuff they're going through, and did all the usual stuff, trying to get agents. And it's kind of, now I realise that that's not a sort of a very lucrative path, as there's not that many books about people in bands. There's books about people who were actually in bands. There are not many fictional books about them. So after that, I started trying to write crime stuff. I wrote one which was not very good, and then I wrote the first Cullen one, and that took me about 3 years to get right. And then self-published it on Kindle after getting lots of rejections. I had a couple of agents who were interested in it, but then they passed, and that made me really angry and determined to do it. So then I put it on Kindle, and then that was kind of maybe not the golden age, but the silver age. So it was quite easy to. It's a lot easier than it is now to get noticed, I think. So I was kind of lucky in that sense. I was along with James Oswald and a few others at that time, where it was easy. You just uploaded generally, and people would buy it. And that was kind of the start of that. I was working full time and just kept hammering the books out. I did about 4 in the first year, maybe more, 5, I think. And then that was enough to income to go full time, and since then I just haven't looked back. I just kept writing. Had a couple of contracts with Amazon Publishing, did the Fenchurch books with them. I've got a deal with Headline for one book, which came out last month, called Senseless, and a deal with Bookager. The third one came out again in June. So the second one, sorry, the third one will be out in January next year. So those are set in Seattle. So yeah, it's been quite an interesting time. But a lot of it was pouring that anger in about sort of the record business and music industry and stuff, and so channeling a lot of how I fell into something that's quite it was a creative outlet for all that stuff. Because I wasn't the sort of the lead singer or anything like that. I played bass, and you're not expressing yourself. So I hadn't used up a lot of my soul with the songs. I just sort of played bass parts and did drum programming and stuff like that. So it was quite good to actually be the sort of the soul this whole creative output, if that makes sense.
Okay. So the next question, I'm also going to just turn this towards Edinburgh because this is hashtag Edinburgh. So just wanting to ask, why did you each choose Edinburgh as a city for? Obviously, Ed's got other books set in London and America, as you just said. But why did you choose Edinburgh for either one of your books or for all of your series? Val first.
Well, when I was writing Hunter's Chase, which was the first in the series, I thought initially that I might make up a place the way that Peter Robinson did with his town Eastvale, which is nowhere in Yorkshire, but everywhere in Yorkshire. And then I thought I might set it in Denver where I was at high school. But Denver is a very big city and takes a long time to get from one part to another. So that probably wouldn't work for me. But I had lived for a long time in Edinburgh, and I thought Edinburgh is a city. It has a prison, it has 3 universities, 4 universities now. It has 500,000 people, which is small for a city, but living in Edinburgh is a bit like living in a big village. Everybody knows everybody else. And what that allowed me to do was to make it seem as if everybody in the city did indeed know everybody else. And my baddies and my pops and my goodies all know each other, or know of each other. And that works well for the way I tell my stories.
That's very interesting. So, Lesley?
Well, I'm Edinburgh born and bred, and I totally agree with Val. Edinburgh is a village. It's a total village. You can't go anywhere or talk about anybody because everybody does actually know everybody else. And when I wrote my first book, it was the typical first book, autobiographical, bringing in lots of your own knowledge about your hometown to it. And I live in an area of Edinburgh called Trinity, which is quite kind of rarefied, really. Lots of really big old houses in it. And I thought they were really interesting. I read a sort of history of the Trinity area. And lots of the houses here date back to when that Leith was a big seafaring port, and this was where people built their houses if you actually owned the boats as opposed to worked on them. So lots of them have things like towers where people would go and sit and have a fine malt as they watched their ships come into shore. But there were also lots of kind of things like hidden rooms in these and tunnels down to the sea. And the hidden rooms had lots of sort of theories about why they were there. And some of them were like priest holes or something like that, which didn't really fit in with the timeline of when they were built, or were they, for when the press gang came in and you wanted to hide away all your seafaring folk so that they didn't get kidnapped. But the most likely explanation is that this was where people were storing their hooch, so they didn't have to pay any, HMRC taxes on that. But as a novelist, that's a really interesting kind of thought, that you've got these big old spooky houses with hidden rooms in it, lots of nefarious deeds going on. And my family is I've got a very large sort of formerly Irish Catholic family, most of whom lived in Leith. And Leith's quite a different kettle of fish. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have a kind of minor criminal from Leith inherit one of these big old houses. So that was why I started writing about Edinburgh, and then just kind of stuck with it really for the series that I wrote after that.
Peter, why did you choose Edinburgh as a backdrop for your books? As I said, you were in Northern Ireland, you were in the Republic of Ireland, and you were in London as well. Was there any reason that you decided that, oh yes, it's not all Edinburgh, is it? Grace does move about the country, but primarily, I think the books did start off in Edinburgh. Am I right about that?
Oh no, she started off in Belfast. She was the RQ officer originally, PSNI, and then she moves to Scotland. Death in custody goes wrong for her. But actually, what I try to do, some of the stories take place in Newcastle, Glasgow, Liverpool, parts of Perthshire. The book I've just done, quite a bit takes place here in Dublin. In fact, the title's Blanche. And what I'm trying to do is reflect what a modern detective would do. I mean, primarily she's based in Leith. Always go back to Leith. It's quite simple. I worked at a Leith police station for 3 years in the murder squad, and I've always loved the place. I really do. It's so full of light and shadows, if you like. But I try to reflect what a modern detective would actually do, because they don't work on one patch nowadays. They can be all over the country, or they are all over the country, and so each book, the first 2 books, in fact, into the 3rd book, there's a lot of reflection of Northern Ireland. Set in Edinburgh, taking over the drugs, which actually happened 12 or 13 years ago. So, but yeah, she's based in Leith. She's often in Leith police station. She drinks in a pub in Stockbridge. But I think I'm actually reflecting myself there rather than a fictional character. So it's probably quite simple.
That was interesting. And Ed, why did you decide to set your books? Well, obviously the Bain and Cullen ones are the Edinburgh. Their Leith is. Did they start off in Leith and then they moved into the main part of Edinburgh, or are they still set in?
So it was like a fictional police station on Leith Walk, which was like an empty sort of spot. I think there was a garage there or something, and it's now student halls of residence, private ones. So yeah, they're kind of based Leith-ish, and they're covering that sort of side of the city. And Cullen lived in Portobello like I used to. And I think the reason was just that I lived in Edinburgh, and I think it is a fascinating city. I think there's, anyone who writes about it will uncover something entirely different from everyone else who's covered it. Obviously, I was a huge fan of Ian Rankin's books, and I felt that I could bring something entirely different to what he does, but still in the same genre. So that was kind of a sort of drive to it, was to write about a cop who was the complete opposite of Rebus, and still tried to make it as interesting as possible.
Interesting. So the next question I was going to ask again about Edinburgh is, have you got a favourite part of Edinburgh that you've featured in your books, or have you got a place that you maybe would like to set a future novel in roundabout? I'll start with Val again.
It's interesting that we've all mentioned Leith. Because Hunter Wilson lives in Leith, and a lot of the action begins or ends or revolves around that part of the city. But I lived more towards the south side of the city, so the other part or area that features in my novels is the area around Morningside and Marchmont and Bruntsfield. And I think that one of the things that is fun about Edinburgh is there are all different kinds of pubs. And so I like to take my characters to different pubs. They go quite often to the Golf Tavern up in Bruntsfield. Or in the most recent book, a lot of the action revolves around Deacon Brodie's on the Royal Mile, which is just across from the High Court in Edinburgh. And so that makes for quite a useful scenario there. And I think it's one of the places that you can do a lot in quite a limited amount of space. Edinburgh is not a huge city physically, and so you can play with the different areas and the different semantics of the people who live in different parts of the city. So it's a great place to place a novel on that basis.
Lesley, is there any favourite bits of Edinburgh that you've already used in any of your books, or you would like to use in any of your books?
Yeah, obviously I've got a lot of affection for both Trinity and Leith, and Peter, my dad was in the police force and he used to be the desk sergeant at Leith Police Station,
Right,
so
okay.
I think you and I should have a conversation about that sometime offline.
Yeah.
But at the moment, since the pandemic hit, I've been working from home, and kids were obviously being homeschooled for a while. So we got the bikes out and started cycling around all the cycle paths near us, so the old railway lines. And one of them appears in the first book in the pandemic series, The Health of Strangers, because obviously that's set against the background of a pandemic, so there's nowhere that teenagers can go really to hang out. So they start having silent raves in one of the massive sort of railway tunnels that near me in the middle of the night, so that they're not disturbing anybody and getting away with that. And every time I walk through the tunnel now, I think, oh yeah, plot point.
Peter, is the same question. Is there any landmarks in Edinburgh that you've already used or you would like to use, or are you just kind of, obviously, because as you say, you kind of move the books about,
I think keep using Leith as sort of the first exchange because Leith was an amazing place to work, a great station as well, of course, and created some great police characters, some real police characters. But no, I think there's progression of the books. If now she's working here in Dublin, I'm in Ireland at the moment, and been doing some research as well. Part of the book, in fact, the reading I'm doing for the same book takes place in Holland, where I worked for years as well. And I think the books are developing now into a more sort of broader canvas. And I think the books have moved more towards a sort of thriller type of story, and more into international organised crime. This one's about contract killers, but I tried to change it because one of the things I was determined not to do was to write, about serial killers, because Scotland seems to be full of serial killers. We're knee-deep in dead bodies, according to a lot of fiction. So a lot of the books are about human trafficking. I worked in that area quite a lot. So different kinds of crime that I find personally just as interesting and more interesting, in fact. So who knows where next? Probably, again, because of previous experience, maybe Nordic corner, something like that. But I never know till I sit down and write what I'm going to do anyway, so there's no point in trying to pretend I know the answer to that question.
Not a problem. And Ed, is there any places in Edinburgh that you enjoy writing about, or you would like to use as a backdrop for a book, or are you quite happy, like Peter, just like sort of moving between like different cities? So obviously you've got London, then you've got Dundee with Vicky, and then obviously you come back to Edinburgh with Cullen and Bain. But is there any places in Edinburgh you like to write about or would like to write about?
I think I've covered, weirdly enough, I've done a lot of sort of stuff not in Edinburgh. So the first book was mostly set in Edinburgh, and then I did two set in East Lothian for some reason I can't quite fathom now, and then one set in West Lothian, and then I was back in Edinburgh and Glasgow as well. And so I've done a lot of geographical plotting, which is quite strange. And then the Craig Hunter books go all over the place. So the last one was up in the Highlands, the second one was over in the Algarve, and I'm going to do one set in Iceland next. So yeah, it's kind of just, I suppose like part of it is that it's wanting to write about something that's an interesting plate of geography in itself. So like the fifth Cullen one, Cops and Robbers, which was originally published as Bottleneck, that was based in a sort of. So I was based on the first book I wrote about people in a band, and it was about a guy. But it was something we actually did. So we had practice rooms down Nidri Street off the Royal Mile, and underneath it was the old access to old vaults and stuff. So we went for a wee wander around there, and then it was obviously just the extension of finding a dead body down there. So that part of ancient Edinburgh is really interesting, but it's kind of a bit overdone. So a lot of people have done that exploration of sort of old historic parts, and I like to prefer to sort of do more sort of current crimes as well, so keeping things more modern. So the second Colin and Bain one was set in a supermarket as people were buying up bog roll and so on a few months ago, and the third one was set in partly in New York and partly in Edinburgh, so that it got that someone who shouldn't have been in New York getting stuck over there during the lockdown. So it's kind of I think a lot of it is nowadays I tend to focus more on character and what I want to happen in the book than the geography necessarily, but that's definitely sort of an integral part of it, and I always like to include somewhere unusual. So the next Colin and Bain one's is called Gore Glen, so it's going to be set near in sort of Midlothian near Gore Bridge and all those places. So it covers a different geography.
That's actually really interesting, because as we've all been saying, Scotland is such a wide variety, but such a large country, and it's quite easy to like jump from one county into another county. I mean, some ways that we can like go to Edinburgh through Perth means we jump from Fife to Perth to Edinburgh. So you're just jumping like 3 counties, whereas other people, my friends down south, will say, oh, 2 hours and we're still in the same, like we're still in Newcastle, we're still in Leicestershire, and I'm like, no, in 2 hours I could jump about 3 counties and back again. And it's great that crime writers can do that. You don't have to be from Edinburgh to write about Edinburgh, because it's easily accessible. It's the same with every place. You can live in Fife and write about Edinburgh, live in Dundee and write about Fife, and it's great that kind of that's easily accessible for you guys to do that. Another question I'm just going to ask was actually I think I'll go for a reading, because it's 1:30 just now. So I think Val, Lesley and Peter are going to do a reading. That's right?
Happy to.
That's fine. So Val, do you want to start?
Yes, I will do. I'm going to read from the prologue to Hunter's Secret. And we're back in December 12th, 1983. You willing to admit defeat, bro? Fraser asked. Defeat? I don't know the meaning of the word, his brother jeered. It means I win again. I'm just faster than you. Faster and smarter and better looking. That's all. Admit it. Says the 13-year-old squirt. Yeah, right. You do know that I just let you win to make you feel good. Ha, 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 and I don't think. You want me to believe that? Honestly, Christian, even my name is better. Fraser Ross Spencer Wilson. You want... Just as well you weren't born with a lisp. Anyway, I've decided to change my name, his brother said. What? And how's that gonna work? It won't matter what you call yourself to Mum and Dad. You'll always be Christian. Everybody you know calls you Christian. You were born on Christmas Day to a church minister, so tough luck to you. Thanks so much. I'll be 16 in 2 weeks and I'm changing it and using my middle name, Hunter. I'm doing it, whether they like it or not. They won't, not one bit, and they won't ever use Hunter. You'll always be Christian to them. I suppose I know that, but I'm going to use Hunter anyway, so you can start now or I won't let you win again. Good luck with that, with both of those, Fraser grinned. He threw his leg back over his bicycle. Anything's better than Christian, Hunter said. I agree, but Mum and Dad won't. That's all I'm saying. Hunter looked at his brother. They were so similar in so many ways, but so different. His brother's grey eyes danced with mischief, and his interests varied with the season. In Hunter's opinion, Fraser's confidence was misplaced because his own footballing ability and his darts prowess were better than Fraser's. He knew his parents thought of him as more serious than his younger brother. He was older, so they had always asked him to look out for Fraser. He knew this had given him a better sense of responsibility and that he was observant. "So are you ready for more defeat?" Fraser asked. "I'll not be giving you a second win today," Hunter began to mount his bike. As he did this, his gaze swept over the area and he noticed a plaque. "Hey, Fraser, look. Old Councillor Billy Hope only opened this part of the Water of Leith pathway this year." "Who cares? He's an old crook by all accounts." "Well, I think it's interesting. They say this walkway will go all the way from Balerno to Leith when it's finished." "Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And it's too cold to stand and chat about it. Let's get home." "Come on, I'll race you, Christian, and you'll lose." "Not this time, and it's Hunter. I won't answer to anything else." "Aye, you will. No way Mum or Dad will use anything but your given name. We both know that. To prove it, I'm going to beat your hide getting home. Let's go." "No way you're not, you bam." Both boys stood on the pedals of their bikes and with their heads down, rode as fast as they could along the pathway. Hunter led his brother. Their breath froze and hung on the air as they pedaled faster and faster. Hunter was dismayed when Fraser overtook him in the charge towards home along the route which goes through the heart of Edinburgh. "Hey, eat my dust," Fraser shouted over his shoulder. He laughed. They passed the neglected Warriston Cemetery with its fallen, overgrown gravestones and raced near the Leith Cannon Mills bike path. It's a former railway line with old platforms, stone railway bridges and tunnels. Hunter thought it looked cool. Then he noticed that Fraser was not looking where he was going. With his head down to streamline his body, Hunter was sure there was no way Fraser could see well in the falling gloom. All of a sudden, his brother's bike shuddered to a halt, and he saw him lurch forward and topple over the handlebars. There was no time for Hunter to stop. He followed on his brother's heels and hit hard, wet ground immediately after Fraser. "Shit, what the hell was that?" Fraser said, rubbing his arm. "Why did you brake? Just to be a jerk? You're such a liability." "No, don't be an arse. My bike flicked over that old branch and the ground is all wet. It's soaking. I just didn't see the branch and now my arm's bloody sore. Do you think I've broken it?" "Nah, don't be a baby. Your arm's fine." "Shit. You think it's not broken? How can you know? You haven't even looked." "I think that's not a branch, Fraser. Look." Hunter shone the light from his bike onto the offending item. "It's a fucking leg. And look at all that blood. His head too. He's taken a real beating." "Oh, fuck no, you're sitting in it. You're covered in his blood."
Ooh. So, Lesley?
I'm going to read a wee bit from the latest Elvis Strangers novel, which is called Murder at the Music Factory. And for those of you who don't know, I write a series set against the background of a pandemic, and it features the North Edinburgh Health Enforcement Team. So the whole population has to go for a health check every month to make sure they're not carrying the virus. And these are the people that come and hunt you down if you miss your health check. So I think it's safe to say there's some currency with real life at the moment about this. So this features Bernard, who's one of the health enforcement team. He's a bit of a he's a bit of a nervous character, and unfortunately in the previous book they crossed one of Leith's drug dealers, one of their leading drug dealers, who is now a bit annoyed about that. And Bernard's just being updated on the situation by his temporary flatmate, Anne-Marie, who's a bit of a rough diamond. So, any road, I've cooked. He joined her in the kitchen and peered into the saucepan she was pointing at. It wasn't immediately apparent what the dish was, but it smelled delicious, even against the background aroma of chemical jasmine. It's stovies. Stovies. He hadn't had stovies since he was a boy. The smell evoked his grandmother's kitchen in Pennycook. A sudden doubt struck him. Is this vegetarian? Are you a vegetarian? Yes. Then yes, it is. But you go and take a seat, son, and I'll bring it over. She shooed him into the living room. There's wine as well. Thank you, he said, surprised. As a teetotaler, he was surprised she'd even thought about getting a nice bottle of something in. You didn't need to go to all this trouble. My pleasure, son. She plonked a large plate of stovies in front of him, along with a very generous glass of red. It's the least I could do. The stovies were delicious, and although he had his doubts about their veggie credentials, he had a moment's guilt before his taste buds overruled his head and he kept shoveling. He threw back a large mouthful of the wine and nearly choked. Whatever he was drinking, it wasn't a pick of the week from the Sunday Times Wine Club. Anne-Marie grinned at him. It's a cheeky wee number, isn't it? A guy in the pub was selling him out the boot of his car. I bought you a couple of bottles. He looked at the glass. The base note he was sensing was probably antifreeze. He wondered if the skin on his tonsils would grow back of its own accord. Any road, son. Now that you're settled and all that, I've a couple of things to tell you. Bernard put his fork down. So this was what all the pampering was about. She had bad news for him, and all this kindness was just buttering him up to make it easier to swallow. I've been asking round Leith if anyone's seen my brother. Nobody's seen him for days. None of his drinking cronies, none of the bookies, no one. I'm thinking he's gone. You mean left town? Said Bernard hopefully. She shook her head. He's not got the organisational skills to do that. Every time Alex had a problem in his life, man and boy has been up to me to sort it out. If he's not asking for my help, I think there's only one reason for that. I think he's dead, son. Bernard stared at her, trying to tell if she was upset. She remained inscrutable. The only thing he could read from her body language was that she was desperate for another cigarette. I'm so sorry. He picked up his plate and wine glass and stood up. I don't suppose you'll be going to the police? Nah, any road. There's more. She motioned him to sit down again. He obeyed, his sense of foreboding rising as his body descended. I bumped into one of the lassies from the project on my travels. Bernard assumed the project was the charity Anne-Marie had previously worked, supporting sex workers in Leith. She said she'd seen Scott Kerr in a pub on Salamander Street a couple of nights ago, which had surprised her because he doesn't usually drink round here. He made a beeline for her and started asking if she'd seen me recently, and he wasn't being very complimentary, if you get my drift. He nodded. Then he started mouthing off to the whole pub about how people think they can get one over on him, but he's smarter than that. Said he's going to be settling some scores. She lit up her fag and made a token effort to blow the smoke in the direction of the window. I bet half the pub shat themselves when he said that. But you think he was talking about us? There's more. Bernard closed his eyes. He was feeling dizzy. Jerry, the lassie I was talking to, was in a different pub yesterday. She sees Kerr's in there and nearly backs right out again, but a couple of her regulars are in and she's got bills to pay, so she keeps a low profile and hope he backs off soon. She tunes into what he's saying and it's the same shtick as the night before. He's been wronged, he's on to them, and they're going to suffer. Oh God. This time, but he's going on about how he's going to toy with them first, play with them like they're mice, and he's some God almighty cat. Says he's going to have a bit of fun. You think he's toying with us? I think he could be. But killing your brother, that's way beyond toying. I think Alec's dead, but I'm not 100% sure he's been murdered. He could just as easily have taken a plunge into Leith Docks on the way back from the pub, and time will tell on that one. But I also think that somebody like Kerr would see that as toying. He's not like you and me, son. He doesn't put the premium on people's life that we do. We need to tell the police. Her jaw dropped. Have you got some kind of death wish, son? Kerr's got pals in the police. You go shouting your mouth off to them, you're putting yourself in line for a very nasty accident. So what do we do? She shrugged. Wish I knew, son. Bernard picked up his wine glass and took a very big gulp of the antifreeze. You're on mute, Lynsey.
Oh, if I'm mute. Thank you. Peter, have you got a reading for us?
Yeah. This is from Glasnevin, the book that I've just been finishing touches to just now. Glasnevin, for anybody that doesn't know, is a cemetery in Dublin, the most amazing place and worth a visit if you're ever there. And the book itself is about contract killers, but it starts off in Holland. The other point I'd make here is, as a liaison officer there for years, getting woken up in the middle of the night, quite a common thing, with calls from officers from other countries, so it kind of reflects that as well. So, Detective Chief Inspector Danny Oliver looked at the clock beside his bed and groaned. It was still the early hours, and as always, the booze had dropped him into sleep without any effort, and just as easily woken him in the middle of the night. He'd been a king-sized pisser with some colleagues in The Hague, and was already suffering a hangover from hell. But like a true Scot, he'd tried everything on the booze. Beer first, wine with the meal, then the spirits. He'd never been able to do the sensible thing and have just one or two, but it'd been a hoot. Everyone seemed to have overindulged, and the bonus was that I hadn't punched or insulted anyone. Could remember everything, so he didn't have to suffer a day of self-loathing and worrying what embarrassments lay hidden in the blank pages of his memory. He reassured himself that at least he could have the next week booze-free, no social events on the calendar, and could stick to the day job as an officer in Europol. He'd been seconded to the British office 3 years earlier. His job coordinating operations against organised crime groups, and it meant cooperating with the other European officers based in the same building. He'd enjoyed good years in Holland. His time was running in, and he was due to return to Police Scotland, where he'd been promised a posting in one of the major investigation teams, or the MITs as they were better known. He'd been staring at the ceiling and wondering if sleep would come again and let him escape from whatever was punching the inside of his head and draining the saliva from his parched mouth. The phone ringing dragged him back to the real world. He looked at the bedside clock and it was almost 2 a.m. In the Netherlands, that was still early for socialising, and the bars and restaurants would be going full tilt. Oliver said God, but knew that the Almighty wasn't taking calls for hangovers that night. His eyes felt gritty and raw. He knew it would be work because he was on call. He knew he shouldn't go on the piss when he was duty officer, but he lived alone, so there was no partner to show him a yellow card when it was necessary. It was Jan Peters, the on-call officer for the Dutch team. He was an experienced intelligence officer and possessed one of the calmest dispositions Oliver had ever worked with in over 20 years in the job. Sorry to bother you, my friend, but this is rather urgent. Peters describing the issue as urgent, or rather urgent, meant something had gone near nuclear. And Oliver was wide awake, because as sure as God made little green apples, he'd need to be. He forgot the hangover, and like the career detective he was, some inflamed grey matter never got in the way of the job. He'd had too much practice for that. Pierre's voice was calm, as if he was discussing the latest score from his beloved Ajax football team. We'd been running a job in Amsterdam, a gang of human traffickers, bad people, Daniel. Peters always used Oliver's full name. Problem is, they plan to kill someone in Amsterdam tonight who they think quite rightly is informing on them. He's an important agent for us, but we can't get in touch with him. All we know is in the Centrum somewhere, but that could be any one of 100 bars or the red light area where he spends half his life. Oliver said okay because he knew the punchline hadn't arrived yet. The thing is, Daniel, this team have brought in contract killers to do the job. We have the gang who hired them monitored through an intercepted phone and picking up conversation with the contractors. So the problem is they're on their way to kill our agent. We are working all out to try and get a fix on the location, but we don't know if we can get them before they do. It's a bad situation. Oliver managed a grin because the Dutchman was a master of understatement, and the situation was clearly in the file marked possible clusterfuck. Oliver said okay and waited, because the Dutchman had said nothing about that would concern the British. But of course, Peters hadn't called in the middle of the night because he was lonely. Oliver fumbled for a cigarette packet next to his bed, then remembered he'd stopped smoking 4 weeks and 2 days earlier. Oliver's got to the point. We're listening to these guys and they're speaking English. Maybe lucky you're on call, Daniel, because they have a similar accent to you. And I'm going to run a clip for you. Oliver winced as he always did when the phone intercepts was mentioned by the Europeans. The Brits, like so many other issues, never discussed intercepts and almost pretended they didn't exist. The Europeans and almost everyone else in the world thought the Brits were crazy, quite happy to discuss and share information openly. Everyone knew phone taps went on, so why pretend they didn't? Oliver stared at his toes and realised he needed serious clipping. He listened, heard a series of clicks, and as the recording was set up for him, he exhaled quietly through his teeth and felt his pulse bump when the voices crackled over the line. The one who was giving the orders, and obviously the employer for the job, was Dutch. The man answering? Well, it was just like being home. The hard tone of central Scotland whacked his ear. No bother, pal. We find him, job done, then it's a stand down. There was something else in the voice that Oliver couldn't quite place. It would come to him. He needed coffee and headed for the kitchen as Peter spoke again. I think listening to the other conversation that these men are military or rather ex-military, it's clear they have training. That was it. Oliver realised what he'd heard in the voice were the clipped edges on the words, the reference to a stand down. It sounded like military to him. The guys are Scot, Jan, but off the top of my head, we don't have any intel on a team working in this part of the world, but that means nothing. I'll phone the London desk right now and see if they have anything. I think this will be over soon, Daniel. Either we get there first, or you'll have more than a headache to worry about. Leave that.
Wow, sounds good. So I've got a question here from Noel Holton. I'm going to start with Ed. So, and I'm going to then go around to all of you. And it's, have any of you used real life experiences or situations to form the plots or characters in your novels? And I'll start with Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. Yeah, so the second Fenchurch book, God, even called Worth Killing For. That opens with Fenchurch and his wife away to get some food, and then they see a girl running up from the tube station Islington High Street, and she gets stabbed by someone on a bike, and that's based on when I was working down in London, I got my phone stolen from out of my hand by a little kid on a bike. I must have been at 15 or 16. So that sort of made me, once I got over it, got my new phone and all that sort of stuff, that made me think about that kind of thing. And actually having it happen to in front of them added a different dynamic to the kind of story that you get. Whereas, you know, there's been a murder kind of aspect to it where someone gets a call, whereas that was something that was actually very visceral happening to the main characters. I think that's pretty much the only time I've used anything like that in one of my books.
Interesting. And then I'll start with Peter, the same question. Have you used any real life experiences or situations to form the plots and characters in your novels?
Yeah, it's a good question. And this comes up at talks sometimes. It's surprising because ex-colleagues and friends are all convinced that they recognise people in the books. And it's a whole variety of people, you know, and I can't convince them otherwise, you know, and Grace is apparently a whole range of people. I tried to avoid it, to be quite honest, but it did come up 2 or 3 times. There were ideas in my head about real life situations. I thought they're too good not to use. So in the second book, there was one small story, and it's not about crime. It's actually about something that changed the way I thought about the job. And it was that kind of situation. In the book, it's presented as the wise old Leith cop, Lesley, speaking to the young cop. and sort of imparting his wisdom, you know, the old Doc Dixon, Doc Green kind of thing. It actually happened at a particular point in my early part of my career. And there's a couple of other ones where I thought that's just too good, too good not to use. But I've buried them quite deeply in the narrative. They are there. But I suppose for me, the thing is that you can always, you know, where you might get stuck somewhere, I can always sort of think of a way, because you know, work through the procedure so often myself in so many different situations, and you know, crime or organised crime or terrorism, you know, whatever. So, but yeah, some of the things that happen in real life are truly much stranger than fiction, and it would be a shame not to plant them in there somewhere. Some of them will remain secret, I might add. But the reading I just did there, actually, the you know, the wake up in the middle of the night in Holland was very common. It happened all the time, and there's something in the Hangover as well.
Interesting. Well, I mean, a lot of my family are. Well, my uncle, my mum's brother, he's an ex police. I think he was just police constable, I think. But yeah, there's some things that he said that actually does happen, because a lot of people say, oh no, they've just like dramatized that on TV. Or he's like, no, a lot of that actually is based on true life. A lot of it is dramatized to obviously get the people to watch the TV shows. But yeah, it is really interesting. I find like sort of like the criminal profiles, all those kind of jobs really, really interesting. I don't think I could do them personally, but I do find them very interesting, and I have much respect for the people that do actually do those jobs. The same question to you, Lesley.
Well, in my day job, I work for a charity, and we spend a lot of time working with the police and the local council and NHS and that, but planning for things that could go wrong. Most of the time we plan for like bad weather, which is the thing that tends to happen, but we also plan for things like train crashes that, you know, we saw recently, and pandemics. And kind of the one of the motivations for writing a book series about pandemics was that whenever you watch things like The Walking Dead or 28 Days Later, there's always a bit of me that thinks, well, you know, in reality, that wouldn't happen. We wouldn't go down to this like hardy band of survivors within a week of a pandemic hitting. So I wanted to write about people that were at the sharp end and a bit more realistically about what would happen in a pandemic. I didn't really expect that, you know, my novels would be put into the test quite so much, you know. When I was writing about this, I thought I'm using all this insider knowledge to be an expert on this. And of course, everybody in the country now is now an armchair expert on how pandemics work and the government response. And I did get quite a lot of it right. Didn't foresee things like furlough. It never occurred to me that we would actually have, you know, particularly a Conservative government paying 80% of people's wages. And I did not foresee the rush on bog roll for a respiratory illness. I think I can be forgiven for not getting that one, but most of the other stuff I did call about right. So yeah, I pulled a lot on real life for those.
I'm just going to say, definitely, and my mum and I actually, while I was just finishing your book as lockdown started, and I actually then just noticed the article that you'd shared, and of course I shared it to my mum because we were obviously watching the Scottish Government broadcasts and stuff, and I was like, because when they were talking about, you know, like, is it man-made, that sort of battle sort of thing, and then I won't give any spoilers, but you know, that was a point where I was like, Mum, you've got to read this. And she was like, oh, is that one of the authors that you interviewed? I was like, yeah. She was like, I don't read books, but she was quite interested. She was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Very real life. And I'm like, yeah, definitely. You never
very, very difficult. Very difficult book to market at the moment, you know, try and do something tasteful about it. That when the Death at the Plague Museum came out, our bookmarks for that had Death at the Plague Museum on one side, on the other side of it is the pandemic is spreading, don't get sick. Which is not entirely tasteful in the current climate.
No. So I take it you've had to bin those bookmarks then?
Well, I didn't really know what to do with them, and I had an event with the WRVS, so I took them along and sort of did that sort of stick about, you know, how tasteless this was nowadays, and the old ladies thought it was brilliant, and these just disappeared. Everybody took one home to like show them off to people. So And I can't help but noticing that the plague, sales of the plague have gone through the roof, you know, the Camus book. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's my audience, but how do I find them? That's the difficult thing.
Definitely.
I think you're muted again.
I'm sorry. Just getting used to Val, the same question.
No problem. Well, I was a lawyer in former life, and so I had a lot of contact with the police, with CSIs, with visits to police stations and courts and jails, and a lot of what I saw and experienced forms some of the background for the books. But I have to admit that I have a friend who's a retired DCI and a friend who's still working as a CSI for Greater Manchester Police. And I get them to give me a hand if I get stuck with anything procedural that needs a bit of guidance. Although I take artistic license to move the story along, of course I do. Sorry, Peter.
That's okay.
You muted.
That's 2 o'clock, but I'm actually going to just quickly get you just to promote your latest book, just even like show it up, or just a wee quick like intro to it. And so I'll start with Ed. If you just want to.
I was going to bring it up on the phone and show you it, but I've not got my props prepared. Yes, the latest book, Hell's Kitchen, which is the third Colin and Blaine book, and it came out 2 weeks ago. So that's like I said, in Cullen is in Edinburgh, back on kind of operational duty during the sort of start of lockdown, and Blaine, being an idiot, is stuck in New York because he's recording a podcast as part of an American-wide tour called Jings Across America, where they're drinking craft beer in various cities, and hilarity on that side. So it's kind of like this book's about trying to humanise that character, because he's a bit of an arsehole to be polite, and he so this is taking him on a very dark personal journey, which is maybe not what people expect. So that's out now on Kindle and paperback.
Brilliant. Peter, your latest book that's out.
Well, the Glasnevin's not out yet, you know, as it says. But I'll shout out for the last book I put, which was not a Grace McCallan book. It's called Maxine's Story, and the reason I raise it is it's about a Leith sex worker, and you know, throughout the books, all of the books, I've tried to sort of raise the issue of human trafficking, which is something I do a lot. I've got quite strong feelings on it. So it's about 2 days in the life of a Leith sex worker, and tried to make it as real as possible. And you know, if anybody does get, they'll see that hopefully anything that's raised from the book will go straight to charities that support women in that position. So it's called Maxine's Story, and but it's not a Grace McCallan.
Thank you, Peter. And Lesley?
This was a book I was talking about, Murder at the Music Factory. It's the 4th book in the Health of Strangers series, and you can get them. There's a deal on, if you go to the Sandstone website, if you want to buy all 4 of them, in the likely event of that, there's a deal on for them. Also quite excited because it's about to come out on digital as well, and it's also about to come out in Braille. And apparently for one, the whole series is being done in Braille, and for one book, you need 6 or 7 volumes of Braille. So I'm thinking if there's any Braille readers out there that are getting into the series, they'll need like an extra room in their house just to store all of those. But yeah, that's my books.
And Wendy Jones H. Jones has said, ask Lesley Kelly about the chili suppositories.
Yeah, I think that was how I was going to murder somebody and not be found out about it.
Yeah, only Wendy could have mentioned that. So Val, yourself,
Well, I've got 2 books out in the last couple of months. The pandemic was really useful for me. And so Hunter's Secret is the most recent thriller set in Edinburgh, and Let's Get Published has also been well received. It's non-fiction, but hopefully helpful to those looking to get published in the foreseeable future.
sounds amazing. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel. So we had Val Penny, Lesley Kelly, Peter Ritchie, and James on the hashtag Edinburgh Crime. So the next one is at 3 o'clock, and that's hashtag Highlands and Islands, and that's Myra Duffy, Margaret Kirk, Myra Duffy, Margaret Kirk. I just have to. So many different authors, just trying to remember who's on what panel. Sorry, people. Oh, sorry about this. My brain is like, should have looked this up before. So we've got, Margaret Kirk, Helen Forbes, Alan Martin, and Myra Duffy. I'm so sorry about this, guys. And it's shared by Jackie Collins, Dr. Noir. Thank you so much for joining me. It's gone so quickly. The hour. I hope you all enjoyed watching, whoever's watching live, and thank you again for taking part in this.
Thank you.